My name is Lorraine Carter, and I turned 65 years old last Tuesday. For most of my life, I believed I knew who I was to the people around me. Devoted mother, reliable friend, helpful neighbor. The woman who showed up with casseroles when someone was sick and advice when someone was lost. I thought I'd spent 6.5 decades building a life of meaning, of connection, of being needed and loved in equal measure. I was wrong about almost all of it. I found out on the night of my surprise birthday party, when I arrived 30 minutes early and heard, through the closed door of my daughter's dining room, what the people I loved most actually thought of me. And what I learned in those 30 minutes changed everything about how I understood my life, my relationships, and who I wanted to be in whatever years I have left. But let me start at the beginning, because this story isn't just about a party. It's about what happens when you build your identity on being useful to others and then discover they've confused your presence with obligation, your generosity with servitude, and your love with something they're entitled to take without ever giving back. I was born in 1960 in a small town in Georgia where everyone knew everyone's business, and the church was the center of social life. My mother worked as a nurse, my father as a school custodian. We didn't have much, but what we had, we shared. My mother's philosophy was simple. You help people. You show up. You make yourself useful, and that's how you earn your place in the world. I absorbed that lesson like water into soil. When I was 8, I started helping Mrs. Patterson next door with her groceries. When I was 12, I babysat the Wilson kids every Friday night so their parents could have date night. When I was 16, I organized a fundraiser for the church roof that was leaking so badly Pastor Williams had to preach with an umbrella on rainy Sundays. People said I was mature for my age. They said I had an old soul. What they meant was that I made their lives easier and they appreciated it. I met my husband Raymond when I was 19. He was 22, a year out of trade school. Confident in the way young men are when they've just learned how to fix something important and people need them for it. We got married 6 months later. I was pregnant with our daughter Andrea by the following spring. Raymond worked as an electrician. I worked as a secretary, then a bookkeeper, then an office manager at a dental practice where I stayed for 30 years. We lived in a small house with a yard big enough for Andrea to play in and later for our son, Marcus, who came along 3 years after his sister. I loved being a mother. I loved packing lunches with notes tucked inside. I loved attending every school play, every soccer game, every band concert where Marcus played trumpet so badly I had to pretend my allergies were acting up to explain the tears. I loved being the room mom, the PTA treasurer, the volunteer coordinator for the school fundraiser. But somewhere in all that loving and giving and showing up, I stopped asking myself what I wanted. Or maybe I convinced myself that what I wanted was to be needed. That being the person everyone called when they had a problem was the same thing as being valued. Raymond died 7 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden, brutal. The kind that leaves you standing in a kitchen holding a spatula, wondering why you bothered to flip the pancakes since there's no one left to eat them. The grief was enormous, but so was the space he left behind. Not just in our bed, but in my calendar. In my sense of purpose, who was I if I wasn't Raymond's wife? The answer, I told myself, was Andrea and Marcus's mother, their children's grandmother, their family's anchor. I doubled down on being useful. I babysat every time Andrea called, which was often, because she worked full-time as a marketing executive and her husband, Troy, traveled constantly. I watched their 2 kids, Jasmine and Tyler, after school, made them dinner, helped with homework. On weekends, I took them to museums, parks, movies. I became their de facto third parent. For Marcus and his wife Lisa, I was different but still essential. They didn't need childcare. Lisa worked from home and their daughter Zoe was in preschool. But they needed other things. Help with home repairs when Marcus was overwhelmed. Grocery runs when Lisa was on a deadline. Someone to host holiday dinners because their condo was too small. I was happy to do it. Genuinely happy. Or so I told myself. But there were small moments. Small clues I ignored because acknowledging them would have meant admitting something I didn't want to face. Like when Andrea called one afternoon and said, "Mom, Can you pick up Jasmine from soccer? I'm stuck in a meeting. Was the third time that week. Andrea, I said carefully, I have my book club tonight. Can't you reschedule? Please, Mom, I really need you. So I rescheduled. I always rescheduled. Or when Marcus asked me to host Thanksgiving again. Even though I'd hosted the past 6 years and mentioned wanting to try something smaller. But you're so good at it, Mom, he said. And honestly, it would be a huge help. Lisa's stressed about work. So I hosted. I always hosted. Or when my friend Evelyn invited me to join a women's trip to Savannah long weekend. Just the two of us, museums and good food, and no one needing anything from me. I'd love that, I told her. Then Andrea called, needing me to watch the kids while she and Troy went on a marriage retreat their therapist had recommended. I'll do it, I said to Andrea. To Evelyn, I said, can we reschedule? Evelyn's face told me she'd heard that before. The weeks leading up to my birthday, I felt strange. Not sad exactly, but hollow. Like I was performing a role I'd perfected but could no longer remember auditioning for. Andrea called 2 weeks before my birthday. Mom, we're taking you to dinner on the Friday after your birthday. Dress nice? We're going somewhere special. Just the 5 of us. I asked. Andrea, Marcus, their spouses, and me. Yep. Family celebration. You deserve it. I was touched. I didn't usually ask for much, and I appreciated them making the effort. I bought a new dressy purple, elegant, the kind I never wore because where would I wear it? I got my hair done. I felt for the first time in months like something other than a caretaker. The day of the dinner, I spent the afternoon preparing. I'd offered to bring dessert habit, I suppose, and I'd made my famous coconut cake. The one the kids loved. I packed it carefully in a carrier and headed to Andrea's house, where we'd agreed to meet before driving to the restaurant. I arrived at 6:30. Dinner was supposedly at 7 o'clock. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I tried the doorknob. Andrea always left it unlocked when she was home. The door opened. The house was dark. But I heard voices coming from the dining room at the back. Laughter. I walked quietly toward the sound, assuming they were gathered there, maybe setting up a surprise after all. My heart swelled with gratitude, and then I heard my name. I swear to God, Andrea's voice, sharp with irritation. If my mother calls one more time asking if I need help, I'm going to lose it. I froze in the hallway, just outside the dining room door, which was slightly ajar. I should have announced myself. I should have coughed, knocked, said something. But my body refused to move. What did she do now? That was Lisa, Marcus's wife. Nothing specific, Andrea said. That's the problem. She just ... exists. Constantly. Texting, calling, showing up. You need anything? Can I help? Let me watch the kids. It's suffocating. I felt my stomach drop. Marcus laughed, but it wasn't kind. Dude, I know. Last week she offered to come over and organize our garage. Our garage, Lisa. Who does that? Someone with no life, Lisa said. The room laughed. Troy, Andrea's husband, chimed in. To be fair, she's been helpful with the kids. I'll give her that. Helpful, Andrea repeated, her voice heavy with sarcasm. Sure, but it's not like she has anything else to do. What else is she going to fill her time with? She retired, Dad died, and now we're her entire world. It's honestly kind of pathetic. Pathetic. The word landed like a slap. She acts like she's doing us this huge favor, Lisa said. But she needs us more than we need her. She needs to feel important, needed. And we let her because it's easier than hiring a sitter. Exactly, Andrea said. And don't get me started on the guilt trips. Oh, I canceled book club to help you. Oh, I didn't go on that trip with Evelyn because you needed me. Like we're supposed to feel bad for asking her to help when she volunteers constantly. She does volunteer constantly, Marcus agreed. It's a lot. Like, Mom, get a hobby. Make friends. Stop making your kids your entire personality. There was a pause. Then Troy said, hesitant? Are we being too harsh? I mean, she's turning 6. She just lost her husband. Maybe she's lonely. Course she's lonely, Andrea snapped. But that's not our fault. We didn't tell her to make us her whole life. She chose that. And now we're stuck playing along because if we don't, she'll cry and make us feel guilty. This party is going to cost me a fortune, Marcus muttered. But if we don't do something big, she'll act wounded. She always acts wounded, Lisa said. That's her thing. Martyr, Mom? They laughed again. My hand went to my mouth to stifle a sob. I stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute. Then I turned and walked back to the front door as quietly as I'd come. I closed it softly behind me, got into my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. Through neighborhoods I recognized, past the grocery store where I shopped, the church where I still volunteered. I ended up at the park where I used to take the kids when they were small. I parked and sat on a bench near the playground. It was empty. The swings moved slightly in the breeze, chains creaking like tired bones. I tried to process what I'd heard. My children, who I devoted my life to, thought I was pathetic, suffocating, a burden disguised as help. They didn't see me as generous. They saw me as desperate. They didn't value me. They tolerated me. Worse. They were planning a party not because they loved me, but because they feared I'd make them feel guilty if they didn't. I cried in that park for an hour. Not the gentle, cathartic tears of release, but the ugly, choking sobs of someone whose entire understanding of themselves has just collapsed. My phone buzzed. Andrea, Mom, where are you? We're waiting. I stared at the text. I could go back. Pretend I hadn't heard. Walk into that dining room with a smile. Accept their fake enthusiasm. Eat cake. Play along. I could continue being the version of myself they described needy, pathetic, desperate for validation. Or I could stop. I turned off my phone. I drove home. I walked past the coconut cake still sitting on my kitchen counter. I sat in the dark and thought about the past 46 years since Andrea was born and I became a mother. Who had I been before that? And who had I become after? The answers were uncomfortable. Before, I'd been someone who equated worthiness with usefulness. After, I'd perfected it. I'd made myself indispensable because I was terrified of being disposable. I'd given and given and given, not out of pure love, but out of a desperate need to be needed. And my children, in their own flawed human way, had let me, because it was convenient. Because free childcare and home-cooked meals and emotional labor are easier to accept than to refuse. But convenience isn't love, and being needed isn't the same as being valued around midnight. My phone still off started buzzing with notifications I couldn't see. I finally turned it on at 2 a.m. 53 missed calls, 38 texts. Andrea, Marcus, Troy, Lisa, even the grandkids' numbers, though I suspected adults were behind those messages. Where are you? Mom, please call us. We're worried. This isn't funny. Finally, from Andrea at 1:47 a.m. Mom, I'm calling the police if you don't respond in the next hour. I texted back a single line. I'm fine. I need space. I'll reach out when I'm ready. And I turned off my phone again. I spent the next 3 days alone. I ignored calls, texts, the knocking on my door. I unplugged my landline. I sat with myself in a way I hadn't in decades without the noise of everyone else's needs. On the 4th day, I made a list. Not a to-do list. A truth list. Truths I'd been avoiding. 1. I had no hobbies that weren't related to my family. 2. I had no close friends I hadn't repeatedly canceled. On 3. I had no sense of self that wasn't tied to being useful. For I was 65 years old, retired, financially comfortable, and completely unmoored because I'd spent my entire adult life defining myself by what I could give others. 5. My children loved me, probably, but they didn't respect me. And that was partially my fault for teaching them. They didn't have to. I decided to write letters. Not texts. Letters to Andrea, to Marcus, to the friends I'd neglected. To myself, the letter to Andrea was the hardest, Andrea, I came to your house early on Friday. I heard what you said about me. All of it. I'm writing this not to make you feel guilty, though you probably do. And you should, but to tell you some things I should have said years ago. You're right that I need to feel needed. You're right that I made you and Marcus my entire world. You're right that it's suffocating, but you're wrong that it's entirely my fault. I taught you that my love came with service. I taught you that you could take without giving. I taught you that your needs came before mine, always, no exceptions. And you learned. You learned so well that you've built your adult life around having a mother who shows up no matter what, who sacrifices without question, who never asks you to sacrifice back. I enabled that. I apologize. But you also accepted it without ever once asking if I was okay, if I was lonely, if I had dreams beyond your children's soccer schedules and your home renovation crises. You took and you took and you took. Okay. And you called it letting me help. So here's what's going to change. I won't babysit anymore unless you ask respectfully and give me at least 1 week's notice. I won't cancel my plans for yours. I won't host holidays unless others offer to contribute financially, physically, emotionally. I'm 65. I have, if I'm lucky, 20 good years left. I'm going to spend them building a life that isn't just an echo of yours. I hope. Eventually, we can rebuild our relationship, but it will be on new terms. Terms where I'm a person, not just a resource. I love you. I always will. But I'm done being your idea of a mother and ready to become the version I should have been all along. Mom, I wrote similar letters to Marcus and Lisa, shorter, but with the same message. Things are changing. To Evelyn. I wrote, Evelyn, I'm sorry for every canceled plan. Every broken promise. Every time I've prioritized my children's convenience over our friendship. If you're willing, I'd like to try again. That trip to Savannah. Let's reschedule. For real this time. Lorraine. And to myself I wrote, Lorraine, you are 65 years old. You are not pathetic. You are not a burden. You were a woman who loved too much in the wrong direction. It's time to love yourself in the right one. Start now. I mailed the letters. Then I did something I hadn't done in 7 years. I went to the senior center in town. It was terrifying. I walked in expecting judgment or pity or the same cliquish dynamics I'd avoided my whole life. Instead, I found Martha, a 70-year-old former teacher, who grabbed my arm and said, New face. Thank God. We need fresh blood for book club. Do you read? I used to, I said. We'll start again. We're reading Toni Morrison next month. You're in. I joined the book club. I joined a watercolor painting class where I was terrible but didn't care. I started volunteering at the food bank, not because anyone needed me to, but because I wanted to. I called Evelyn. I got your letter, she said, her voice cautious. You meant it. I meant it. Savannah in 3 weeks. I'll be there. Andrea called a week after receiving my letter. Mom, she said, her voice tight with emotion. I couldn't decode. Can we talk? Yes, I said. But in person? At a neutral location, we met at a coffee shop. Andrea looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept. She sat down across from me and said, I'm sorry. For what? I asked, not cruelly, but genuinely. I needed her to name it. For taking you for granted. For calling you pathetic. For treating you like a convenience instead of a person. Her voice broke. For not asking if you were okay. Thank you, I said. But Mom, she continued, and I braced for the but, you also hurt us. You made us feel guilty for having lives. You martyred yourself. And when we tried to set boundaries, you get this look, wounded. Disappointed Dan Weed fold because it was easier than dealing with your hurt. You're right, I said. I did that. I'm working on it. Are you? She asked. Or are you just punishing us now? I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm building a life. For me, that doesn't mean I don't love you. It means I also love myself. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Andrea said, Can we start over? Not over, I said. Forward. New rules. New boundaries. both ways, okay? She said. I can try. Marcus was harder. He felt attacked by my letter. You made it sound like I'm a bad son, he said when we finally spoke. I invited you 2 things. I called. You called when you needed something. I said gently, there's a difference. That's not fair. Maybe not, I said. But it's true. Took months for us to find a rhythm. Months of uncomfortable conversations, of me saying no and them adjusting. Of them inviting me to things without expecting me to work at them. Of me showing up because I wanted to. It's not because I feared what would happen if I didn't. The surprise party they'd planned never happened. Instead, 6 months after my actual birthday, we had a small dinner at a restaurant Andrea chose. Just the 5 of us, Andrea, Marcus, their spouses, and me. At one point, Andrea raised her glass. To Mom, she said, who's teaching us what it means to have boundaries. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, Marcus added. I clinked glasses with them and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Like I was there because they wanted me, not because they needed me. Evelyn and I went to Savannah. We stayed in a bed and breakfast with creaky floors and curtains that smelled like lavender. We ate too much, laughed too hard, and didn't apologize once for taking up space. You're different, Evelyn said one evening as we walked along the riverfront. How so? Lighter, she said. Like someone untied a weight. They did, I said. I did. I'm 66 now. It's been a year and a half since I overheard what my children really thought of me. A year and a half since I decided to stop being the person they needed and start being the person I wanted to be. I still see my grandchildren, but on a schedule that works for me. I still help my children, but not at the expense of my own plans. I still show up, but I also leave. I've learned that love doesn't require that giving without boundaries is just another form of disappearing. Martha from book club says I'm her favorite new member, which may or may not be true, but feels good anyway. The watercolor teacher says I'm improving, which is definitely a lie, but I appreciate the encouragement. Evelyn and I are planning another trip to Charleston this time, and my children. They're adjusting, learning to see me as more than a support system, learning that I have needs, preferences, limits. It's uncomfortable for all of us sometimes, but discomfort is part of growth, and we're growing. I showed up to my surprise party early and overheard what they really thought of me. And what I discovered wasn't just their truth, it was mine. That I'd been complicit in my own diminishment. That I'd taught people how to treat me by never asking for better. But I also discovered this. It's never too late to change. To set boundaries. To build a life that's yours, even after 65 years of living for everyone else. To stop being what people need and start being who you are. And who am I? I'm Lorraine Carter. I'm 66 years old. I read Toni Morrison and paint terrible watercolors and travel with my friend and say no without guilt. I'm someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone's friend. But first, finally, I'm mine.